The Atlanta Braves need to add a starting pitcher this winter, but there's a few reasons why that guy might not be a lefty. Let's talk about it. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today for Wednesday, December 18th. Your source of news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsey Crosby. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Crosby Baseball. You can follow the show on Twitter, Braves_today. We have a Facebook page and an Instagram as well. And you can find all of my written work, bravestoday.com. It's the Braves Today Substack, as this is both a podcast and a newsletter. And this offseason for the Atlanta Braves has been quiet, right? We haven't made any major signings. You've let some players leave. And the needs for this team are pretty clear, right? You need an outfielder, a starting caliber outfielder. You need some sort of additional relief option, right? Now, they may be filling that internally with Daysbel Hernandez. That's an entire show. And all of these depth guys that they've grabbed to stash in Gwinnett, that's a show for a different day. But the other, assumed need is for a starting pitcher. Because if you were to sit right now, and we've broken this down on the show, but if you were to sit from where we are right now, your rotation is Chris Sale, Ronaldo Lopez, Spencer Schwellenbach, Grant Holmes, and Ian Anderson as your 1 through 5, with Spencer Strider coming back at some point in time, we believe in the first half of the season. Not trying to scare anybody, we just genuinely don't know. And then behind them, AJ Smith-Shawver is, I think, going to contend for a starting job in spring training. You've got Bryce Elder, Hurston Waldrop, Connor Gillespie, some prospects who aren't yet on the 40-man roster like Drew Hackenberg and Lucas Braun. And then you have whoever else you add. But something that I've noticed, and I can't quite think of where I saw this, maybe it was on Braves Twitter, maybe it was on Reddit, was this idea that the Braves not only have to find a starter, but that they have to find a lefty starter. Because with Max Fried leaving, Chris Sale is your only left-handed starter. And we've talked before about how, as amazing as 2024 was, we have no guarantees that he'll both be healthy and effective in 2025. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at, does it have to be a lefty starter? And if it is, what realistically at this point in the offseason, after you've already seen some notable names get signed, Blake Snell, Max Fried, etc., who realistically is left to be that lefty starter that you can acquire this offseason? Yusei Kikuchi is another one of those guys that I was looking at. Matt Boyd as well. Like 4 lefties off the board. Off the top of my head, I think there's only been like 11 major free agent pitching signings, and 4 of them were lefties. So that's a little that's a higher than normal percentage you would expect based on the distribution of lefty starters versus righty starters in baseball. And I guess first we need to talk about, do you have to have a lefty, right? So to try to figure this out, I went to go look at how the league does against lefty starters versus how they do against righty starters. And the goal here was to see, is there a significant difference in performance against the average lefty starter in baseball? So I pulled every start by a right-handed pitcher and got the opposing stats, just collectively, all combined, and every start by a lefty and got the opposing stats. So against right-handed starters in 2024, major league hitters hit 243, 312, 400. And they averaged a home run every 29.4 at-bats. So if you think about, if you go 5 innings, you allow 5 hits, that's 20 batters faced. Odds are you didn't give up a home run, right? That's the way that this kind of has worked. Because then you'd be giving up 37 home runs if you made 30 starts. Against lefty starters, the stats are remarkably similar, okay? So I'm going to give you right-handed stats and then left-handed stats for each component of the slash line. So against righty starters, 243. Lefty starters, 245. You hit 2 points of batting average better, which is, to me, within a margin of error. I'm not even counting that. On base, 312 against righties, 314 against lefties, within 2 points. I'm not really counting. That's not statistically significant. Slugging, 400 against righties, 397 against lefties. Within 3 points, 3 points the other way, which means your OPS is 1 point different between lefties and between righties. So from a pure batter production standpoint, your average lefty starter in baseball is no better or worse than your average righty starter in baseball. Now, there was one area where there was a little bit, like a 1 inning difference, and that was in homers, right? I mentioned that righties gave up a homer every 29.4 at-bats, righty starters, not righty relievers. Lefty starters, it goes up to 31.9 at-bats. So 29.4 to 31.9. So if you're rounding 29 to 32, so 1 inning later, on average, you're giving up a home run, which is probably why the slugging is 3 points lower, 400 to 397. This is not in any way perfect, mind you, but this is just a simple little microcosm to say that on the aggregate, in Major League Baseball, whether you have 2 righties and 1 lefty for a weekend series, 2 lefties and 1 righty, on the whole, it doesn't really matter. Okay. Now, I do agree that having a rotation of nothing but righties is a little bit frustrating, simply from the perspective of if you face a team that is particularly bad at hitting lefties, you can't take advantage of that by setting your rotation to have your lefty face off against them. And in that similar vein, if you have a team that's much better at hitting righties, you can't mitigate that a little bit by putting some more lefties in the rotation. Now, I did not have the time to go pull this stat for all of the teams in the NL East. So it's entirely possible that maybe Philly is significantly better at one over the other, or New York, the Mets are much better at one over the other and things like that. And it does matter for the Atlanta Braves specifically. I did look at how the Atlanta Braves do at lefties versus righties using last season. And against lefty starters, the Braves have a batting average 12 points higher, an on base 12 points higher, and a slugging 35 points higher. So Atlanta does particularly well against lefties. Like if the Cubs ever come to town, they're going to be in trouble because the Cubs have a couple lefties in that rotation, right? But on the aggregate, like on the whole, across Major League Baseball, you don't see teams do significantly better or worse against lefty starters than righty starters. And I feel like that is so many teams now, Braves excluded here, are willing to run platoons at multiple positions to try to mitigate any severe handedness issues that they have in their everyday lineups, right? You can swap out 2 or 3 guys if you need to. If you have a guy that's particularly bad at hitting lefties, you can swap him out for somebody else. And I don't know if you have to find a lefty starter, which is a good thing because at this point in free agency, the pickings are slim. I mentioned 4 of them have already signed. Matthew Boyd to the Guardians, I think it was a 2-year deal. Yusei Kikuchi to the Angels on a 3-year deal. That was the one I was really interested in. 3 years, $63 million, came out to $21.2 per year. That's an Atlanta Braves contract if I ever heard one. And then obviously Blake Snell, 5 years, $182 to the Dodgers. And Max Fried, 8 years, $218 to the Yankees. And so what I did was I pulled Spot Track to look at who is left, right? They have a free agent list that breaks down by what their WAR was last year, their handedness, obviously, and their age, their previous AAV. So you can see who is out there, what was their last contract, and what are you probably going to owe. And there's a couple names in here that you can rule out for different reasons, right? Sean Manaea is one of the biggest lefty starters left in the free agent market. Feels pretty easy to rule him out based on having a qualifying offer. Alex Anthopoulos told us prior to the winter meetings when we spoke to him on Sunday night that they were fine if they ended up breaking the luxury tax threshold where your draft pick would be moved back 10 spots. It was a different matter altogether to be in a situation where you would lose a draft pick. And the thing for the Braves is you would not just lose one draft pick were you to sign a qualifying offer player, you would lose two. As a team that paid into the CBT, you would lose your second and fifth highest picks, as well as $1 million from your international bonus pool for the next period. Atlanta, there's already been reports coming out about Atlanta has an agreement in place with what it's expected to be one of the top international amateurs in the 2026 IFA class. So not the one that signs this upcoming January, but the one the January after. That's the class you would be losing $1 million from were you to sign a qualifying offer player this winter. And we'll talk a little bit more about the IFAs as we get closer to that January 15th deadline, because we'll get to hear from Brave staff. We'll have a press conference with Brave staff about the players that they signed and some of their thoughts and all of that. So we're going to cover that like we always do. We'll have, if it all works out, we'll have the video for you on the YouTube channel. I personally hate international free agency when it comes to making verbal agreements with 14-year-olds to sign them when they're 16. I hate the whole system, right? And I've been on the record a long time. I used to host a prospect podcast for 2 years, and I was on the record the first week of the show, one entire episode was international free agency sucks, and how do you fix it? So we'll get there. We'll cover it, right? We're going to cover Atlanta signing these kids, but it's a tough look, right? It's a bad situation all around. It's just not great. Anyway, so we already know the Braves are going to be out on Sean Manaea, right? Just based on Alex Anthopoulos' public comments and the way he's operated since he took over the team. The only player with a qualifying offer that he has signed where he had to give up a draft pick was Will Smith, the closer entering 2021. And he won you a World Series. He did not blow a save in the postseason. You won a World Series. It's hard to argue that didn't work out. But outside of that, the Braves haven't really been willing to give up those draft picks for those players. They waited to sign Dallas Keuchel until after the deadline to no longer lose a draft pick. They just haven't been involved with those guys. And typically, those are top of the market guys anyway. So you're not going to be playing around with them. And then also, you're not playing around top of the market anyway, right? There was virtually no chance they were going to sign Blake Snell. Part of the reason I was so excited for Yusei Kikuchi was I thought that deal would be realistic. So many of the contracts we've seen this winter so far, both position player and pitcher, have come in higher than all the common projections, right? Tim Britton at The Athletics, pretty good at projecting contracts. The average deal signed so far this winter has been 13% higher than his projections. Fangraphs has crowdsourced some of their projections using the cost of war and the market and all that kind of stuff. And the average contracts come in 22% over their projections. And it's not just the stars getting paid. Role players have come in 19% over. And when you look at it, a lot of it's driven by those big markets that don't have television broadcast questions. The New York Yankees with YES, the New York Mets with SNY, the Giants with NBC Sports Bay Area, and then the Dodgers, who don't own their own, they don't think they own Sportsnet LA, but it's like $1 billion-something broadcast deal, whereas the Braves have one of the worst TV deals in baseball, to the point that when Diamond declared bankruptcy, they said the only one of these we want to keep is the Braves. They ended up keeping more, but that should improve for 2026, by the way. We'll get to that in a later show. A lot of the deals that you've seen, like Nathan Eovaldi, 3 years to go back to Texas, the Rangers are trying to build their own thing, right? The Angels don't own their own thing. The Royals don't own their own thing. The Guardians made a signing to bring back Bieber, but then turned around and cut salary. They're in a similar situation, right? The TV deals are impacting this. So a lot of the top teams are able to spend more because they have the certainty and they have more TV revenues than teams like the Diamondbacks or the Padres, or in this case, the Braves, who have an under-market TV deal that was signed prior to them being sold to Liberty Media. In just a minute, let's talk about some of the lefty arms that are still available. If you're going to sign a lefty starter or acquire a lefty starter, who could it be? We'll do that next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsey Crosby talking about the need to acquire a starting pitcher and if it really has to be a lefty or not. And you can go back, if you're just joining us here, you can go back to the first half of the show. I don't think it needs to be a lefty starter. I think you can just get a starter and you are fine. But there is this belief that it needs to be a lefty. So we're looking at the lefties that are available in this show. Quick reminder, by the way, while you're here, if you have questions, we're doing a mailbag this week. Stuff came up. We weren't able to get it done last week. We're doing a mailbag this week. Send them in to me. Again, I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. You can send them to the show on Twitter. You can YouTube comments down below. You can even email me, contact@bravestoday.com. Okay, so if you're looking at lefty starters in the market, there's not a ton of options. There's three kind of options you can sign for guys that are I'm going to call them flawed veterans. Three different flawed veterans that you can sign. Each of them have upsides and downsides, and this is automatically ruling out some guys. I'm automatically ruling out Patrick Corbin. I want nothing to do with Patrick Corbin. I'm sure he's a lovely person. I don't want Patrick Corbin playing for the Atlanta Braves. Ruling him out, there's kind of three guys you can sign here. The first one I'm looking at, Andrew Heaney, formerly of the Texas Rangers. 33 and a half years old, was just under one WAR last year, made 31 starts, 160 innings. 5-14 with a 4.28 ERA, 159 strikeouts, 241 walks, and 23 homers allowed. Again, made $12.5 million last year. Tim Britton's prediction is 2 years and $35 million. So he would be cheaper than Charlie Morton. Some of the flaws here is when you look at his stuff, his fastball was okay last year, 91.6 miles an hour. Velocity was down just a little bit. His changeup is the star of the show. Changeup is what carries this whole profile for Andrew Heaney. And the breaking stuff's a little rough. It's mostly a slider. He does throw a curveball as well. But the issue with the slider is a couple fundamental flaws with the slider. The first thing is it comes in around the same velocity as the changeup. So it's in the same velocity band. He's really just living in two velocity bands, the fastball velocity band and the changeup slider velocity band. The second issue is the slider's movement, and specifically the horizontal movement, is well below average, right? StatCast will break this down for you, the vertical movement, the horizontal movement, 2.3 inches to the glove side, which is not a lot of movement. And compared to the average lefty slider, it's almost 5 inches less than the average lefty slider. So your issue with Andrew Heaney is you don't have the stability of a great fastball, right? You have a good changeup, but it's an off-speed pitch. And I had this inherent fear of changeup dominant guys, right? Like it worked for Tom Glavine, but it feels like I just can't trust anybody else to be a changeup dominant guy and survive in the modern MLB. And then the slider, again, same velocity band as the changeup, but it has cutter style movement versus actual slider style movement. You either need to throw it harder, right? He needs to throw it 86, 87 or so. It would at least get it out of the same velocity band as the changeup. You could have 5 mile an hour separation from changeup to slider, 5 more from slider to fastball. And then, and he did throw a couple, they called them cutters last year, that moved like the slider, but they were in the upper 80s versus the lower 80s. And they moved a little bit more than the slider. And so it's possible, maybe he did intentionally throw a cutter. Maybe he just threw a slider harder than he meant to and it moved more and he should do more of that. So it's a risky signing because one, It's another veteran, right? He's 33. He hasn't been that great, but it's clear to see like there are some obvious ways that you can improve that profile a little bit. Another guy who is probably going to be cheap because I think he's a significant health risk in question here is Alex Wood, formerly of the Oakland A's. He started the season on the IL with he went on the IL with rotator cuff tendonitis. Ended up being shut down for shoulder surgery, which shoulders are scary. I would rather a dude have a flexor tendon repair or Tommy John than have shoulder surgery. We're still not convinced Kyle Wright exists after the 2022 season because he got hurt, had to have the shoulder surgery, and then got shipped to Kansas City and still has not pitched, right? The hope is he can make it back at some time in 26. They just signed him to a deal on Tuesday to avoid arbitration. So I don't know what the terms of that are yet, but they're expecting him back at some point in time in 26, or 25. But that's what shoulders can do. Shoulders are scary when it comes to a pitcher. I would argue more so than an elbow because there's more complexity in a shoulder. So you could maybe get him cheap if you're confident in the health of the shoulder. And the thing there, it's a back-end profile at best that you're going to want to move out of the rotation when you have anybody better, right? Sinker, slider, changeup. He didn't pitch a ton in 24, but he lost a full mile-an-hour velocity from 23 to 24. He averaged 91.5 on the sinker in 23. He averaged 90.5 on the sinker in 24. So he lost a full mile an hour, probably related to the shoulder, but you don't know for a fact. Has a changeup as well. Probably should be a pretty cheap enough where I didn't see where Tim Britton had a prediction on him. Should be a pretty cheap deal if you wanted to go with that. If you wanted another cheap deal, and I think after watching Ian Anderson, they're not going to do this, but Patrick Sandoval had Tommy John surgery for the Angels. They non-tendered him. He's going to be out until sometime in the second half. And looking at how the Braves didn't call up Ian Anderson down the stretch kind of makes me think that, and that could have been options too, but makes me think they're not going to go after a guy like Patrick Sandoval. The other reason that you might not go for a guy like Patrick Sandoval is the fact that even if you structure it where his base salary in 24 is low, 25 is low, and it goes up in 26. That's a common structure you do for these deals. These guys coming off of injury could be some teams. Shane Bieber got a player option for that second year. Some guys get player options. Sometimes it's the club option. Sometimes it's just the 2-year deal and a mutual option or whatever. The CBT hit does not reflect the actual cash. The way it works, let's say you pay a guy $5 million in year one and you pay him $15 in year two, your CBT hit is $10 million for both years. They take the average annual salary. So if you're trying to reset the CBT, yes, you can keep the cash amount down in 25, but the CBT hit will be higher because of the second year salary, unless you literally just sign him for a season and intend to let him walk. And typically when that happens, when that offer is made, some other team's going to come in with a better offer. So there's a couple options there. Like, outside of those guys, are there other guys you could sign? Yes. John Means exists, right? James Paxton, Martin Perez, Wade Miley, Jose Quintana. Like, the other guys are out there. But based on what the Braves like to do, based on the profiles they like from their guys, I don't really love any of these lefties. But if they were going to sign a lefty, it feels like it's a Patrick Sandoval, maybe an Andrew Heaney, if they think they can fix that slider. It's doable. It's fixable. You just have to figure out, or it's workable. You just have to figure out what they're going to do. It does feel like if the Braves are dead set on finding a lefty starter, and again, going off the first segment, I don't think they have to be. I think you can be fine with a righty. If the Braves are dead set on a lefty starter, feels like a better way to get one is via trade. And I feel like your two big options there are going to be Sonny Gray and Jordan Montgomery. The Jordan Montgomery saga here is well known. He was part of the Boris 4. He also fired Scott Boras after the offseason, but signed that weirdly structured contract with the Arizona Diamondbacks. His contract for the upcoming year as player option he picked up is for $22.5 million. The first year was $25 million flat, and then he had a vesting player option on the number of starts he made, 20, 22 and a half, or 25. He made more than 18, but less than 23 starts. So $22.5 million is the option. And they don't want him. They don't want Jordan Montgomery. Now, he wasn't good last year. 6.23 ERA. The expected ERA was 5.18. And when you look at Jordan Montgomery, sinker, curve, changeup kind of guy, has a slider that he used a little bit, but he had a little bit of just odd. He never really got right. The arm angle dropped just a little bit, not much, but it affected the movement of the curveball. Was more of a, not quite a true 12-6, maybe like an 11-5, and it drifted a little wider off of that. It became like a 10-9, but the issue with it, usually the two-plane break is a good thing, but now it's more towards the MLB average for a lefty curveball, like where a lefty curveball would end up. The whole thing about pitching is you want your pitches to do something that batters are not expecting. Your fastballs to carry more than usual, your sinkers to run more than usual. Like, you want them all to do something different. And his struggles in 23, locations weren't great, but then also a lot of his pitches ended up shifting closer to MLB average for guys with his arm angle and extension and velocities. So he's talked about how he did not have spring training and how that really affected him, and he never really got going this year. I ultimately don't think Jordan Montgomery would be that expensive from a prospect cost to acquire. It feels, based on the owner publicly trashing him, they probably want to get out from under his deal. The question is going to be, one, does Atlanta want to take on the full $22.5 million, and what is the compensation going back to get him? I feel like they're going to wait a little bit longer in the offseason, wait to see if anybody goes after Jordan Montgomery, and if they don't, maybe then reach out and try to get him at a discount. Hey, you take $5 or $10 million of this deal, like we just saw with the Yankees and Cody Bellinger, where the Cubs, the impasse ended up the Cubs are throwing in some money to cover part of Cody Bellinger's deals, like $5 million a year or $2.5 a year, or something like that. The other option here, Sonny Gray, this deal was absolutely wild when it signed, because, like, and full disclosure, I wanted the Braves to sign Sonny Gray before he got a qualifying offer. I didn't want to give up a draft pick, just like Alex Anthopoulos doesn't want to give up a draft pick. St. Louis gets him for 3 years and $75 million. He does have a full no-trade clause, and there is a $25 million club option in 2027, his age 37 season, with a $5 million buyout. Weirdly, if the team exercises the option, he can opt out by just forfeiting the buyout. If he has an amazing year and thinks he can get $30 million on the open market, he can just forfeit the buyout and void your club option and go walk in free agency. It's weird. But it was incredibly backloaded. $10 million in 24, $25 million in 25, $35 million in 2026. So, one, I feel like he's a little more reliable from a health perspective. But two, if Atlanta trades for Sonny Gray, you're going to have to give up probably more of a prospect cost to get him, maybe an actual prospect, and you're going to have to figure out the money. Either you're going to ask St. Louis to keep some of the money, especially in 26, or you're going to have to do what you did for Chris Sale. Maybe you end up guaranteeing the 27 season with the goal of changing some of the salaries across that whole thing, just to not have to worry about how the salary breaks that $22 million threshold that nobody on the Braves is breaking. Also, they'd probably do that to get rid of the deferrals. None of the salary amount is deferred, but the buyout is deferred. $1 million a year for 5 years, which is, I've never seen a deferred buyout before, but that's something they put in there. I know when Atlanta extended Chris Sale, it lowered his AAV to 22 million and it got rid of his deferred money. Maybe that's something the Braves would do if they got Sonny Gray. Again, I don't think you have to sign a lefty or you don't have to acquire a lefty for your rotation. I do think you need a lefty in the bullpen to go with Dylan Lee and Aaron Bummer. I do think we also underrate how good Dylan Lee's been. We'll do that show, probably a whole lefty bullpen show coming up. But I want to hear from you. Do you think it's important for the Braves to get a second lefty for the pen? Let me know. I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. Again, show's on Twitter at Braves_today. You can email me, contact@bravestoday.com. And then while you're at your computer, if you're listening on audio, do us a favor. Leave us a 5-star review with some kind words. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. Maybe also leave us some kind words because they really do mean a ton. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.